Hey everybody, welcome to my kitchen again. Today's lesson is going to be on knife safety. So before we start talking about knives, we need to talk about something that you should always use when you're using a knife, and that's a cutting board. So your cutting board might be wood like this one. You can use a small one if you're just cutting up something small, or you might have a bigger one if you're cutting up a bunch of things or just cutting up something bigger. Okay, so the first thing we need to talk about is how do we know what knife to use for what you're cutting. So if I was to cut up something big like this big squash, I'm not going to use this little butter knife because it's not going to do anything. And this knife is a bread knife, so I'm not going to use that. This little knife is probably too small to cut through the squash, and it'll take me a long time. So I'm going to use this big knife. And I would probably use this big knife also to cut something like a sweet potato, but I wouldn't use it to cut this ginger because it's too big and I might hurt myself. So if I was going to be cutting the ginger, I would use this little knife, and that would allow me to get into the little pieces to take the skin off or whatever I'm doing for the ginger. Now, if I wanted to make myself a nice peanut butter sandwich, I would be using a butter knife, and I would just put that in there, spread it on. I'm not going to use this big knife because it's too sharp, I could hurt myself, and it's too big. So I wouldn't use that knife. And then lastly, we have our bread knife. And we know this is a bread knife because it's got this serrated, it's called edge, little waves. And that helps you to cut the bread. So if you have a knife like this and you're cutting bread, you could always use that. But again, I wouldn't use a butter knife to cut the bread. Probably wouldn't use this small knife. If I didn't have a bread knife, I'd probably use the big one. Okay, so now let's talk about how you hold a knife. You should always hold a knife from the handle. And we can see these ones have different color handles. These ones have black handles. This one, it's not a different color, but you can still tell that there's a handle. That's where I'm going to put my hand. This part of the knife is called the blade. And the blade can be quite sharp, so you need to be careful around the blade. This one is not so sharp because it's just a butter knife, but I could still hurt myself if I really went hard. But definitely on this big knife, the blade could cut me if I sliced myself. So I gotta be careful. I'm only putting my hand on the handle, and I gotta figure out which side is the blade. So one side has a flatter top, and that part isn't gonna cut me or anything. So that part is gonna be up, and your blade part, the sharp part, is gonna be down, touching the cutting board. We don't wanna do it this way, because we could hurt ourselves and we're not going to cut anything. So you got to make sure the blade is going down, and you want to keep your fingers back on the handle. And that goes for all the knives. I'm going to hold just the handle, keep my fingers back, blade down on the cutting board. Now, if I wanted to pass the knife to somebody, there's two ways I could do that safely. So first, I could flip the knife upside down so that the handle is pointing to the person and they could take it. That's one way. Or I could touch the top of the knife where it's not sharp and turn the knife over like that and hand it to somebody. That is another way that I could pass the knife. And we don't want to cut somebody when we're passing a knife to them. If I was to walk with the knife, so let's say I've cut everything up that I need to cut, I'm going to walk over to the sink, but there's other people in the kitchen, I don't want to hurt anybody, I don't want to be walking with the knife blade out and accidentally hit somebody or trip and have the knife go into my leg. So what we're going to do, if you're walking with a knife, you're going to take the tip of the knife and point it to the floor, and the blade, the sharp part, should be pointing backwards. And then you're gonna just walk with the knife down by your side, so that if you trip, it's just gonna go down to the floor. It's not gonna go into your leg and hurt you. And then that takes us to our last knife safety tip, and that is for washing. So if I'm done cooking, and hopefully somebody else is washing for me because I've just cooked, I'm not going to put the knife into the sink if it's full of soapy water like this, because I put it in and it disappears, and then somebody comes to wash and they've cut themselves on the sharp knife. So if I'm done with the knife, I'm going to leave it beside the sink so that the person knows it's there, and then when they're ready to wash it, they're going to hold the knife by the handle and be careful to not touch the blade part. So they're going to take their soap or their sponge and go from the smooth part of the knife blade and wash the knife that way, so that they're not cutting themselves, not cutting the cloth. And you probably want to wash the handle too because you've been holding it. And I'm just going to rinse it off. And I'm all done. And that's our knife safety. We will have another lesson next week where we're going to start chopping things. Have a great week.